The government is hoping to have its so-called foreign fighters bill voted on in Parliament sometime later this month. On Friday, the Joint Parliamentary Committee that's been looking into this next round of anti-terror laws made a raft of recommendations aimed at creating more or providing more oversight on some of the controversial measures, declaring terrorist no-go zones in places like Iraq and Syria, and also making it an offence to advocate, encourage or promote terrorism. To discuss the recommendations and the chances of them being adopted by the government, Labor's made it clear they will back the bill if these recommendations are supported by the government. We're yet to hear from the Attorney-General in response, sometime later this week we're told. But I did speak to the chair of the committee, Liberal MP Tehan. Tehan, thank you for your time. I want to start on one particular proposal that's seen some concern in the Muslim community in particular, making it an offence to encourage, promote or advocate terrorism. You want greater clarity around that. Why?
Well, look, it's an important part of the suite of new powers that our intelligence agencies in the AFP asked for, because what they are concerned about is really that there is three parts to what's encouraging people to go over and fight, and it's this advocacy component which is playing a part. But we want to make sure that the community, it's very clear that what actually those terms mean, and especially legally, so that the courts have a clear understanding of what the government is requiring here.
So is it too broad the way it's currently worded?
Well, it's not too broad, and it might well be that the attorney comes back and says that the idea is it is the meaning of advocacy that you would normally find in the Oxford Dictionary, but we want to clearly understand what it is that the government means by this, and we think that in either the explanatory memorandum or in the legislation itself, the government should set that out.
I mean, for example, if someone does say something very controversial, like we've heard Hizb ut-Tahrir say, that what the West has done is worse than what Islamic State is doing right now, does that amount to advocating people go and join Islamic State?
Look, I'm not a lawyer, but what I would say is what we're trying to capture here, what the government is trying to capture here, is people who come out and do advocate for individuals to carry out terrorist attacks.
But that's inciting someone, isn't it, to carry out a terrorist attack, and that's already illegal.
Yes, but there is the incitement laws haven't really been able to capture this. So what the government wants is those who are advocating it for us to be able to capture them as well. And you know, the reason why the committee has asked for clarification here is that there are grey areas, and we want to make sure that it's very clear what is intended here.
Is there a difference in your mind between inciting and advocating?
I think there is, and I think there is we took evidence very clearly that inciting laws aren't capturing these people who are out advocating. So what we need to do is make sure that the laws now, especially given the heightened terrorist threat that we have in the country, that the laws can capture those who are advocating, you know, pretty extreme things.
The legislation as it stands also would make it an offence to, quote, subvert society. Now, that is another broad term there. What are you recommending happens?
Well, we're recommending that definition be tightened, because subverting society, we were concerned that it has the ability to capture too much. So we've said, OK, we want the government to look at this and refer it back to the criminal code, because we think in that way it will limit the definition of that term.
So that it only refers to an act of terrorism.
So it refers to what is captured by the criminal code when it comes to terrorist activities.
On the idea of terrorist no-go zones, at the moment the legislation would allow the Foreign Minister to declare entire countries off limits. Yep. You say only parts of countries should be declared off limits, and that your committee should be able to review that. How would that work in practice?
So what we've actually said is just take the idea that the Foreign Minister could define whole countries, take that off the table, because that's just going to confuse matters. What we want it to be about is defining regions or areas where the hostile activity is taking place. Now, it could be in an extreme situation where it is a whole country, but still we want the Foreign Minister to draw on the map where the activities are occurring. That way it sort of limits if you like, the blinkers to which the Foreign Minister puts on when doing this.
But it could be be the entire country of Syria.
It could be, but it would mean that that country would have to be. There is hostile terrorist activity occurring throughout that whole country. So what we've really said is just the prism here should be where that is occurring. And then what we've also asked is for our committee to have the ability to look at this issue like we do with prescribed terrorist organisations, and there'd be a disallowance motion of 15 days where the committee has that time to look at it, and then it recommends whether the Foreign Minister's recommendation should be accepted or not.
You want your committee also to be able to look into the counter-terrorism operations of the Australian Federal Police. What powers do you currently have at the moment? What more do you want?
So what we do at the moment is obviously have over the intelligence agencies. So what we've said is when it comes to the Australian Federal Police, that same powers for their counter-terrorism capabilities, because obviously there's crossover now, how the AFP operates with ASIO, and we want to make sure that where that crossover occurs, we're not being limited in our ability to look at these issues.
You've said, the committee report says you don't believe additional biometric data needs to be collected at airports when people are entering or leaving the country. Given we saw Khaled Sharif leave on his brother's passport and join up with Islamic State, why not allow greater collection?
Good question. What we've said is, look, it might be down the track a need for us to look at collecting this material, but if we are going to, we want to have it properly reviewed, we want to have it properly looked at. We think it should come before our committee, before the government goes ahead with it, so that we can ensure that especially the privacy aspects of this can be properly looked at. Okay. So it's not don't go ahead, it's just if you do consider it necessary to go ahead, let's make sure there's the proper scrutiny which occurs before you take the next move.
The sunset clauses in the legislation at the moment, it would be 10 years before control orders, stop search and seize powers, preventative detention orders are sunsetted. You want them all reviewed after 18 months after the next election, and then with a sunset 2 years after the next election. You feel 10 years is too long to keep some of these powers in place?
Look, the committee did feel that. We thought that what we would have is a three-step process here. The Independent National Security Legislation Monitor should look at the laws after 12 months. His report then would help the committee examine these new laws after 18 months, and then the sunset after 2 years. And we think that's a sensible check and balance for what are powers which we were giving our intelligence agents, which we definitely, the committee felt need now, but what we want to make sure is that in 4 years' time, or 2 years after the next election, there is still a real need for them.
There's an interesting recommendation here and a lot of confusion about what to call this latest terrorist incarnation, Islamic State, ISIL, ISIS. The Prime Minister doesn't want to call them Islamic or a state. He refers to them as a death cult. Daesh is a word that's used in the region, and you've suggested this needs to be looked at. Yeah, we do think it needs to be looked at. We took evidence from an Islamic group from New South Wales who said that this would be their preferred term for referring to ISIL or ISIS, and we thought that it made good sense. So what we would like is the government to look at this term to see whether it should be added to the list of terms that ISIS or ISIL or IS use, and then if it should be added, then maybe the government should look at starting to use it, because it does have some connotations which aren't positive, and I think it would help within the Muslim community here and more broadly if we started to refer to them by this term. Committee Chair Dan Tehan, we look forward to the government's response to your report later this week sometime. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David. Pleasure.